With the many different aspects and themes in JoJo spanning from the supernatural to patriotism, fate in JoJo seems to me as the most important and greatest aspect that Araki is able to display in the series. JoJo's is a series based on pretty much legacies and destiny. Each part follows on from one another due to the consequences of the characters before, excluding of course parts 1 and 7, and the legacy that these characters have to take up is all due to the fate of basically the Joestars. Ever since part 1, the Joestars have always been fated to fight against evil, the Brandos being the first of their opponents, and Deer is a very important character that drives the fate of the Joestars onward in the story. I think this is pretty funny because Deer in Italian means God, and fate is something that a higher being like God controls, so that's a pretty neat detail that you can come to find when talking about fate and how it interacts with the Joestar family. Look, this aspect has been used in pretty much every single JoJo part, and you can really see it once you stop and think about how the story is laid out. So today I'll be explaining how exactly fate is used in each JoJo part, as well as giving my own opinion on why it's so amazing and well constructed in each part. So before we actually do talk about how fate is displayed in the different parts, let's take a look at Araki's own opinion on fate and how he wants to perceive it in his own story. In volume 63 of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga, Araki had written his own thoughts on the ongoing theme. Quote, "The sequence, the magnificence of music resides within the chord progression. Even Mozart once said to the emperor that no note could be omitted from a piece. The human body is also made of a genetic sequence called DNA. Thus, we cannot neglect the existence of that sequence of pre-established facts we call fate. But if everything is decided in advance by fate, we tend to think that the efforts that we deploy every single day are in vain. This is one of the points I have to consider when I tell a human epic. Is there a solution to that question?" End quote. Araki is basically trying to say that he wants to find a solution to the problem people run into when they find out about fate. If there is something called fate and everything is preordained, would all the actions you've committed so far be meaningless to you and out of your own will? Araki wants to make his characters either overcome that problem or accept it wholeheartedly. It's an interesting thing to think about before writing a story, as you're not just making your characters find a solution, but you yourself as well. Araki also believes that in his story he had made it so that he can show the full capabilities of humanity itself. Quote, "JoJo is an ode to life and a celebration of humanity. Without help from machines or technology, the main characters face danger with their own bodies as their only weapon. For me, it's a principle. Indeed, I think that science doesn't necessarily make men happier." End quote. Araki shows that he believes in the strength of humanity and shows it in their fight against fate in JoJo's. It's just a neat thing that I wanted to say, as it gives you a much better understanding of what JoJo is about instead of just viewing it as a meme-infested manga filled with buff homo men. Araki wants to test his characters and put them in some of the most toughest situations you could be in. Literally universe-shaking threats are an example. He wants to hurt them, badly, but also wants them to find a solution that would make their actions not in vain, but worthwhile. A solution that will make them shout and say that they've successfully beaten fate and victoriously look at the sky and watch the souls of their comrades part ways. This is what JoJo's is. This style of writing may be sad to watch or read, seeing all the sacrifices made, but it gives you a feeling of intensity and excitement as it makes high stakes for each of the characters, not making it predictable in any way. I personally love this style as it gives many different solutions to each main character on how they tackle fate. Araki's just different, man. So now when talking about fate in JoJo's, everyone usually brings up Golden Wind as the main player that uses it, which is true, but fate is not just used in part 5, it's been used by parts beforehand and also afterwards. In Phantom Blood, where the story has its bizarre beginnings, we see the introduction of both the Joestar and Brando families, and with this, the destiny of the Joestars fighting evil would begin. Fate would bring these two families together and put them against each other to see who will struggle on with the consequences thrown at their faces, and also see who will meet their downfalls due to it. We see Jonathan, a human being, put in a situation where he'll need to literally fight against supernatural beings like vampires and see if he'll come to terms with his fate. Jonathan does. He comes to terms with the situation he has been put through and doesn't fall down from being put up against vampires. He fights on even if he had to see his father die in front of his eyes. He fights on even if he had been betrayed by his own adopted brother. He fights on whilst accepting his fate and eventually dies thanks to it. But what he does do is die with a smile on his face, showing his acceptance. Also, another thing that correlates with fate in Phantom Blood are some of the fortune telling that appear in the part. Wang Cheng, Dio's eventual ally, had prophesied Dio's fate from just looking at the 3 moles on his ear. He had said that Dio wouldn't die as a human, which was actually correct and was fated to happen. Another fortune-telling moment in the part would be, of course, Tom Petty's prediction for Will A. Zeppeli. When coming to find out about Hamon and wanting to train it, Tom Petty had told Zeppeli a prediction on the fate of his life if he continues to train in Hamon. Like Jonathan, Zeppeli had accepted his fate and continued to train his Hamon to put a stop to the evil that the stone mask is controlling. You could say that Phantom Blood is a story about accepting your own fate with a side of the supernatural. For battle tendency, the red Arja is there as an example of how fate is used in the part. It has been said that the stone is fated to stop the Pillar Men as well as creating the ultimate life form. Joseph is able to make this correct as he puts a stop to Kaz using that stone, sealing away his fate in the end. You could also say as a personal headcanon that the Zeppelis are fated to die for the Joestar family, as well as running into the stone mask. The involvement of fate in Stardust Crusaders is pretty obvious, but it's said that all Stain users are destined to meet each other in one way or another. They're also attracted to each other due to a gravity-like force which makes their meetings come together. A big example of how this gravity-like force is used as fate is Dio and Pucci's meeting when Dio was obviously talking about gravity and how it correlates to fate. Boingo's ability in part 3 also correlates to fate. As seen in JoJo, it pretty much predicts the fate of people. Surprisingly enough, it had predicted the injury Jotaro would suffer from in his death scene. The whole part is strongly moved by fate because, well, the Joestar destiny. All the Joestars would be fated to encounter both Dio and his goons one way or another in the JoJo universe, which is basically the destiny the family has. For part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, there's a big example of how Araki wanted his characters to struggle against fate and eventually beat it. 3 words can perfectly give you the example. Bites the dust. Kira Yoshikage's 3rd stand ability. Kira had gotten this ability after being stabbed by the stand arrow for the 2nd time, and this time he was able to gain an ability that had come from his mind and will. He wanted to make sure no one would find out about his identity, as well as making it so that if anyone actually finds out about it, they'll be fated to die. Once the ability is activated, there will be a time loop on the same day the identity was found out, and it will be infinite until Kira actually turns it off. The person who discovered Kira's secrets is fated to die in the exact same way every day until Kira himself reverses it before it's fated to happen, one way or another. Hayato is put into a loop, and even though he doesn't die, everyone that is important like Rohan or Josuke falls to Kira. He does actually beat this ability by using big brain tactics. Thus, he beats fate itself. Araki shows the struggle of humanity against fate in this arc and truly gives us an example of one of the solutions he was looking for. Even if Hayato was going to kill himself due to this ongoing loop, he left his despair behind in the end and showed us that he can actually beat Bites the Dust and can beat fate itself. Now, part 5's example is possibly the biggest thing in the part. Golden Wind is moved by this theme completely, while also having the theme of dreams there as well. The importance of fate starts this part as well as ending it. It's a story of overcoming your own fate and fulfilling your dreams. But Mista's run-in with Rolling Stones before the start of the part had given him a look at what fate has in store for the gang though. It makes him see who exactly is going to die in the near future, being Bruno. Even if he had broken Rolling Stones in the end, it didn't stop fate one bit, but secretly gave away who else is going to die in the end, being Narancia and Abakio. If the story is about overcoming your fate, then wouldn't the actions of the gang have been meaningless as they were already fated to die anyway? Wouldn't that make their journey of overcoming their fate impossible as Rolling Stones already gave away who was set to die? No, it really doesn't. Yes, it's impossible for them to change the fate of their deaths, but what is not impossible is being able to have a strong resolve big enough to change the future for the better. The deaths of the part were really not meaningless, and their actions were not fruitless. Their losses had led Giorno to go far enough to eventually govern fate itself by gaining his own Requiem stand. Bruno, Narancia, and Abakio were all destined to die one way or another in their journey, but being moved by fate didn't make any of their actions futile. Their resolve ended up changing the future for the better. It fits so well with the 2 themes that are displayed in the part, and I really dislike it when Golden Wind is hated on when it basically does the theme of fate the best in JoJo's. An additional example of how fate comes to play in this part is Diavolo playing around with fate itself. He unknowingly does this though. He swears to himself to fate and believes it guides the lives of people and all things, yet he twists it into his own command. King Crimson has the ability to skip time. By skipping time, Diavolo is able to dodge anything fate throws at him. He's about to get stabbed, he skips that time, he's about to get stabbed. He's about to get jumped, he skips that time, he's about to get jumped. He's also able to see 10 seconds ahead into the future, and I think my man just basically manipulates fate itself, not just time. Araki really made the perfect antagonistic ability for this chosen part. Diavolo is not accepting his fate and doesn't try to overcome it, but goes around it. The gang on the other hand moves forward against fate and tries to overcome it. All of Diavolo's times of manipulating fate does eventually come back right at him, because the one who governs fate now is able to give him his punishment. Giorno hands out the punishment and makes Diavolo go through an infinite death loop, or more supposedly, a loop of all the times he had skipped his own death. This is the consequence of playing around with fate, and it truly isn't a good look, man. Part 6 has the example of everyone seeing their own fates so they wouldn't have to suffer. Dio was actually the first person who had came up with this idea and made the heaven plan. Crazy, right? Someone like Dio wanted people to have a peace of mind. He had always wanted to become something big and grand ever since part 1, as he took up the idea of taking over humans with his vampiric abilities. But after his defeat in part 1, he eventually came to gain a new motive, which would be the heaven plan, that is extremely important in Stone Ocean. By resetting the universe and making a new one, people are transported to that new one that repeats the old universe with the knowledge of their own fate. Dio had wanted to basically become the messiah for everyone by completing this plan, but he didn't make it to see the day Made in Heaven appeared. Pucci had taken up the heaven plan for himself as he understood Dio's intentions, and by realizing that if everyone knew their own fate could make the world free of stress, then he would do anything to complete it. The way he is stopped could also mirror the Bites the Dust incident with Hayato. Emporio, the only one left with the knowledge of Pucci's plans, was able to survive Pucci's assault and be transported to the new universe like everyone else in the world. Pucci stopped accelerating time at a point of where Emporio was still at, which would be the prison. There, Emporio would have one final fight against both Pucci and Fate. He would eventually gain Weather Report stand and beat Pucci down. Pucci's ideal world of humanity's happiness would be ruined, only to be told by Emporio that he lost to fate, and that this is the true path of justice before finally being beaten to death by Weather Report. Going into part 7 and 8 is a bit tricky when talking about fate in these two parts, but part 7 obviously has this theme in a way that shows that whatever fate may bring, it doesn't matter, because the shortest route was the detour. Gyro's quote at the end of Steel Ball Run gives us the meaning of his and Johnny's Steel Ball Run journey up to this point. The ending or destination isn't what's important about the journey itself. I think this ties into Marco's death as well, as that was a really tragic thing to put in at the conclusion of the story. But what Araki is trying to tell us is that the actions of the duo were not in vain, and it was certainly the detour that was the most important thing that had happened in the story, and no one was fated to happen in the end. For JoJolian, well, I'ma go ahead and reread the part and try to find out how fate impacts it as well. I at least already know some other themes that are seen in the part, consisting of identity, motherhood, family, and longing for connections. But if I have to be honest, fate didn't really come up in my head for my first and second reads of this part. Since it's finished now though, this will be my first completed reread of the part, so I might discuss some things about JoJolian in the future as well. So, well, fate in conclusion is a gravitational force that pulls people along a predetermined path. Some characters don't know of fate, some come to terms with their own fate, and others will endlessly struggle, constantly questioning or fighting against fate. Although you can change it, fate always loops back around and those fated events will happen again, looking right at you, Diavolo. So that's what I'm going to end off for today. Hopefully you did enjoy, and if you did, make sure to comment down below some more JoJo related video ideas or video ideas in general. This was really fun to make, so I hope to do something similar with another series soon. Now, like always, subscribe if you haven't, hit the like button, turn on bell notifications, and follow my Twitter down below. It's been Endless Requiem, peace.